It only took one email to ruin everything. The life I had built, the future I had trusted, vanished in an instant. But what I didn't expect was how that moment would change my future. I wasn't going to let him win. Here's how I took back control. It was a quiet morning when I woke up to an email that would change my life forever. The world outside was still, a sharp contrast to the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. I had spent years building a life, a home, and a future with someone I trusted. Yet, in a few cold, calculated lines, everything I had fought for crumbled. No explanation, no plea for understanding, just a simple statement of fact. My husband, the man I had once thought I would grow old with, had made a decision without me. The divorce papers were attached, as if they were nothing more than a minor formality. As the words settled in, a strange calm washed over me. No tears. No rage. Just a hollow stillness that gnawed at my soul. I should have been angry, furious even, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of detachment. This wasn't the beginning of my end, it was the end of an illusion I had been holding on to for far too long. The realization hit harder than anything else. My marriage had been built on lies, and now, they were exposed in a way that could never be undone. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to process the words that had just shattered everything I thought I knew. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was betrayed. Not just emotionally, but financially as well. The joint account I thought was secure had been emptied, the savings we had built together, gone. It wasn't just my trust that had been broken, it was my security, my future. It was as if he had erased everything we had built, replacing it with a cold indifference. But in the silence that followed, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let this define me. Not like this. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about taking back control of my life, my future, and my dignity. I had trusted him once, but now, I needed to trust myself. No more playing by the rules he set, no more pretending everything was fine. I was done. As I sat there, a sense of determination began to rise within me. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a battle for my life, and I wasn't going to lose. It was time to take action, to fight for what I deserved, and to expose the man who thought he could walk away without consequences. This wasn't over, it had just begun. But how do you fight back when the person you once trusted has taken everything from you? That question gnawed at me as I stared at the screen, the words still burning in my mind. The answer, I realized, lay not in seeking revenge, but in seeking justice. And I was going to make sure that I had the power to reclaim it. As I closed the email, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. I didn't need to retaliate with anger or violence. No, I would fight back with the one thing he couldn't take from me, my strength. It wasn't about proving him wrong or getting even. It was about standing up for myself, for my future. The legal battle ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was the path I had to take to reclaim my life. And so, with that, I began to make my plan. And as I prepared for the battle ahead, one thought lingered: this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of something much bigger, my journey toward justice and personal freedom. The fight had only just begun. The discovery of the betrayal came with a clarity I hadn't expected. As I sat there, staring at the bank statement on my phone, the numbers in front of me told a story of deceit I had never imagined. It wasn't just that my husband had filed for divorce while I was deployed, he had been siphoning off our savings for months. I'd noticed small discrepancies here and there, but I had brushed them off as insignificant. Now, all those little signs suddenly made sense, like puzzle pieces falling into place. The joint account, the one I had trusted to secure our future, was empty. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me as I began to process the full extent of what had happened. My mind raced back to the moments I should have noticed, the odd texts he would get late at night, the strange silence whenever I asked about our finances, and the increasingly distant way he spoke about the future. He had been pulling away, but I had been too blind to see it. And now, it was clear why. Kurt wasn't just cheating on me emotionally, he had been systematically stripping away everything we had built together. The money I thought was safe had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. What was once ours was now his, and worse, he was doing this with someone else. The name that appeared on the bank statement was one I didn't recognize, Melina. It wasn't a name that had ever come up before, but it sounded familiar, like a whisper in the back of my mind. I had no idea who she was, but I knew she was the key to understanding what had happened. A pit formed in my stomach as I typed her name into the search bar on my phone. The results weren't much, but they were enough to confirm my worst fear. She was his new partner, the one who had moved in while I was away. The more I dug, the more I realized the depth of their involvement. Melina wasn't just a fling, she was a part of this betrayal, working with Kurt to liquidate our savings and set up a new life for themselves. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the fact that Kurt had planned this. He had been seeing her for months, and during that time, he had carefully set up an exit strategy, one that involved me being completely unaware. His actions weren't impulsive, they were calculated. And I had been too distracted by my own obligations to see it. I couldn't help but feel foolish. How had I let this happen? I had always trusted him, always believed that the life we had built together was secure. But in an instant, that security had been shattered. I wasn't just betrayed in the traditional sense, I was financially devastated, emotionally abandoned, and now left with the overwhelming task of picking up the pieces of my life. But this wasn't going to be the end of my story. As the reality set in, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I had to act. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The first step was to gather evidence. I began documenting everything, the dates of the withdrawals, the amount of money transferred, and even the conversations I had overheard. It was clear now that Kurt wasn't just running away from our marriage, he was running with our future, and he was doing it with Melina at his side. Each piece of evidence I gathered made my determination grow stronger. This wasn't just about revenge, this was about reclaiming control. This was about making sure that no one, especially not Kurt, would ever be able to strip me of my dignity again. I had trusted him with everything, and now it was my turn to take back what was mine. As I sat there, reviewing the transactions on my laptop, I couldn't help but reflect on the signs I had missed. I had ignored the small, quiet warnings, brushing them off as nothing more than my imagination running wild. But I wasn't the only one who had been deceived. The more I learned about Melina, the more I understood the role she had played in all of this. She wasn't some innocent bystander, she had been complicit in everything that had gone wrong. It wasn't just the money I had to fight for, it was my self-respect, my sense of trust in the world. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had the power to expose them, to hold them accountable for the lies they had built their lives on. It wasn't just about getting back what was taken from me, it was about making sure they faced the consequences of their actions. The next few days were filled with a kind of frenetic energy I hadn't known I was capable of. Every moment, every piece of evidence I gathered, brought me closer to the confrontation I had been avoiding. I knew what I had to do: confront Kurt, confront Melina, and make sure they understood that they couldn't just walk away from the wreckage they had caused. I wasn't just going to let them destroy my life and walk away unscathed. And so, as I stared at the screen, the plan began to take shape. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I was ready to fight. For my life. For my future. And for the truth. The days that followed the discovery of Kurt's betrayal were a blur, each one fading into the next like the numbness I felt deep in my chest. It wasn't just the shock of the divorce or the emotional wound that cut deeper than anything I had known. No, it was the realization that Kurt had been quietly working against me, slowly draining our savings while I was thousands of miles away. The joint account that I believed held our future had been emptied, and now I was left to sift through the wreckage of what we had built together. But even more devastating was the new name that appeared on the transactions: Melina. The name of the woman who had slowly crept into my life, replacing me without a second thought. The first time I'd heard Melina's name, it was in passing, a casual mention during a conversation I now regretted ignoring. Kurt had laughed it off when I asked about her, telling me she was just a colleague from work. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. but now, everything was clear. Molina wasn't just another fleeting affair. She had been the catalyst, the one Kurt had chosen to rebuild his life with while I was busy serving my country, far away from the drama and deceit unfolding at home. The betrayal was no longer just an emotional wound, it was a financial assault. Our shared life, the one I had trusted with my whole being, had been reduced to an exchange of bank numbers and false promises. I started digging, looking for answers in the places I knew I could find them: our shared financial documents, the joint account statements, anything that might provide clarity. The withdrawals were almost surgical, small enough to go unnoticed, large enough to make a difference. In the span of months, Kurt had systematically siphoned off our savings, often taking just enough to not raise suspicion. It was as if he had planned his escape in slow motion, preparing for the moment when he would be free to walk away without any regard for the destruction he was leaving behind. It was methodical. It was cold. I couldn't keep track of how many times I stared at the bank statements, each entry more damning than the last. But what really got to me was the date of the largest withdrawal. It happened just days before he sent me the divorce email. He had been preparing, setting up his future with Molina while I was still fighting battles halfway across the world. The money wasn't just disappearing into thin air, it was being funneled to her. I tried to think back to all the little signs I had missed. The extra attention he gave to his phone, the long nights he spent working late. I'd written it all off as paranoia, telling myself I was just overthinking it. But the truth was clear now: I had been blinded by love, by the life we had together, and by the promises he had made. I had ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe that things would get better. But instead, I was left with the harsh reality of his betrayal. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this wasn't just about him leaving me, it was about his total disregard for everything we had worked for. The house, the savings, the life we had built, none of it mattered to him. He was willing to throw it all away, not just for Molina, but for the simple freedom of being able to start fresh without the weight of responsibility, without the consequences of his actions. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The thought of him walking away without facing any consequences made my blood boil. I wasn't going to be a passive victim in this. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had fought for, not without putting up a fight. I knew I had to gather evidence, something concrete that could expose his betrayal. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine, it was about making sure he couldn't get away with it. The more I looked into it, the more I found: receipts for things I hadn't bought, transactions for gifts he'd given her, proof of their secret life. It was all there, right in front of me. But I also knew it wasn't enough. I needed to take it further. I needed legal action. I contacted an attorney I knew from a past case, someone I trusted. Seth Vaughn was meticulous, detail-oriented, and above all, he knew how to handle cases like mine. We started going through the financial records together, building a case. I felt a cold, calculating calm settle over me as we pieced together the evidence. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about making Kurt face the consequences of his actions. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for the integrity of my life, for the trust that he had so callously shattered. Seth had some contacts at the bank, and soon we were getting information that was critical to the case. Each new revelation brought me closer to the confrontation I knew was inevitable. But the more we uncovered, the more I realized the depth of Kurt's deception. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about financial fraud, and I was determined to make him pay for it. Every day felt like a countdown to something. I couldn't stay idle, knowing that the man who had once been my partner was out there, building a new life on the foundation of my losses. With every new piece of evidence, I could feel the weight of what I had to do. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way forward. And as the days passed, I felt the pressure mounting, not just from this situation, but from the anger that simmered beneath the surface. I wasn't just angry at Kurt for what he had done to me, I was furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. But anger would not be my weapon. I had a plan, and it was time to put it into motion. This wasn't just about moving on, it was about reclaiming my life, and making sure Kurt knew that his betrayal would not go unpunished. As I made the final preparations to expose him, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of power. I wasn't powerless anymore. I was the one who held the cards now. And I was ready to play them. The night before the confrontation was the longest one of my life. I had everything set. The evidence was gathered, the recordings were saved, and my resolve was firmer than ever. I could hear Kurt's voice in my head, the smug tone as he planned the next steps of his life. But this time, it wasn't me he was leaving behind, it was the life we built together. The house we had shared, the home I had worked so hard for, was on the chopping block. The property was not just being sold without my consent, it was being auctioned off behind my back, as if I had never mattered. Melina was a part of it. She was no longer just the woman who had stolen my husband's affection, she was now involved in something far deeper, something far more insidious. The plan was simple: record everything, document every conversation. I had learned that people like Kurt only show their true intentions when they believe no one is watching. I sat in front of my computer, carefully playing the footage I had captured. Kurt and Melina, sitting at my kitchen table, plotting their next move. He smiled at her, his eyes glinting with a sense of victory that made my stomach turn. He wasn't just in control of the situation, he was savoring every second of it. "We'll move quickly," he said, his voice dripping with an arrogance that I had come to despise. "The house will sell fast, and she won't contest it. She's too busy with her deployment to care." Melina nodded, her lips curling into a smile as she sipped her coffee. It was then that I saw it, the first real crack in their plan. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated how far I would go to take back what was rightfully mine. She didn't know that every word they spoke was being recorded, that every move they made was being documented. I wasn't just playing catch-up anymore, I was ahead of them, silently laying the groundwork for their downfall. When I watched the footage, my heart raced. The anger I had been suppressing for so long began to bubble to the surface. Kurt had stolen from me, emotionally, financially, and physically. He had taken everything, and yet, he still thought he could walk away unscathed. He thought he could simply sell the house, pocket the money, and leave me with nothing. But I wasn't going to let that happen. This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about taking back control, about making sure he understood that his betrayal would have consequences. The plan was set in motion. I called Seth, my attorney, and we went over the footage. Every detail, every word was crucial. We needed to act quickly. With the evidence now in hand, it was time to expose Kurt and Melina for who they truly were. The legal battle had been exhausting, but now, it was all coming to fruition. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was determined. The next day was the day I had been waiting for. Kurt had no idea what was coming. He thought he was in control, but I had a surprise waiting for him. I arrived at the courthouse early, my nerves steeled with the knowledge that justice was within my reach. My hand shook slightly as I held the documents, but I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't someone to be overlooked. I was the one who held the cards now. Seth met me outside, and we went over the details once more. When Kurt walked into the room, I couldn't help but notice the change in his demeanor. His usual confident swagger was gone. He looked around nervously, as if he knew something was wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. And then, I saw Melina enter behind him. She was smiling, but her eyes didn't hold the same confidence they had before. They both took a seat, and I couldn't help but think about how little they truly knew. They thought this would be a routine court case. But they had no idea that I had already won. The hearing was quick, the evidence undeniable. Every attempt they made to justify their actions was met with facts, with proof that I had carefully assembled. Kurt's arrogance melted away as the truth was laid bare in front of him. The documents were real, the recordings authentic. His attempts to deny everything fell flat, and it was clear that the tide had turned. For the first time, Kurt was the one on the defensive. He was no longer in control. As the judge called for a short recess, I sat back, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting off my shoulders. The tension in the room was palpable, but I knew this was just the beginning. This battle, this war, had been years in the making, and now, I was reclaiming what had been stolen from me. When we returned, the decision was swift. The house would not be sold. The funds that had been taken were to be returned, and Kurt would be held accountable for his actions. Melina, too, would face her own legal consequences for her role in the betrayal. I stood up, feeling a sense of vindication that I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about the house, the money, or the years I had spent with Kurt. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The battle had been long, and it had cost me more than I could have ever imagined, but it was worth it. I had fought for myself, for my future, and I had won. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal one. I had taken back control of my life, and no one would ever take that from me again. But the journey wasn't over. There were still steps to take, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had reclaimed her power. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The journey that began with the painful realization of betrayal was now leading to something entirely different. A place of closure and new beginnings. After the courtroom victory, where justice had been rightfully served, I found myself staring at the horizon, wondering what came next. The weight of the past hadn't lifted yet,